بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم. نويت التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير ونفع واندفاع وإفادة واستفادة وحتى التمسك بكتاب الله وسنة رسول الله صلى الله عليه وسلم والدعاء إلى الهدى والدلالة على خير ابتغاء وجه الله ومرضاته وقربه وثوابه سبحانه وتعالى. All praise is due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and peace and blessings be upon his beloved messenger Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. Okay, so for my section, I'm going to be talking about the attributes of the murabbi. That's the person who is, the one who's raising a child, and what that entails. Just so people understand our background. For the people who don't know, myself and Sheikh Faraz, we have 3 children. My youngest is a 9-year-old. I have a 9-year-old, an 11-year-old boy, and a 13-year-old son as well. So that just helps you to understand our background in terms of which children we have. But to begin with, just to look at the attributes of the murabbi, the person who is raising a child, because so often we're so caught up in the day-to-day of, how do we fix things with our children? Things are not going right. What am I doing wrong? And, how do I fix this relationship? So what we need to look at first is, where do you stand with, in your own faith, basically, which is, it's a pretty difficult question to look at. Where do you stand with, where is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in your life? And you have to really look closely at yourself and look at where are your priorities, because there's nothing that will show that to you in another way than raising children, because that's when any elements of hypocrisy that are in you will be brought to light, right? Any elements of this, like the deen, subhanAllah, it's the perfect religion. We have the blessing of being of the ummah of the most perfect of messengers and sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And so, if we are not able to almost take the standard that's been passed down from generation to generation to generation, we don't want our children to be the ones that fall, right? So it's really important that you really think about, where do you stand with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and looking at your own deficiencies first, because there's no way that you're able to, really succeed in raising a Muslim child until you really worked on yourself and worked on conquering yourself and worked on those deficiencies, because it's very easy to turn a blind eye to the problems that are within yourself and just say, oh, well, my son needs to work on this. My daughter, she doesn't do enough of that, and then it goes on to more. It turns into also, oh, my husband, he also, he has this wrong with him, this wrong with him, this wrong with him. Or on the counter side, the husband will be like, yeah, my wife, she's this, that, this, and this negativity, this circle of negativity that people have. Without really looking at what is the main problem here, and that is, where are you yourself, right? It's very easy to start pointing fingers at your other family members and, identifying what their problems are, but what that really is a distraction from looking at yourself, right? Looking at what can I do to improve my own self. And so, to just even start with that, a piece of advice that one of my teachers always gave, which is very humbling whenever you're in a large gathering. It's pretty overwhelming if you go to a conference, but they always said, remember, first and foremost that, out of the gathering that you're attending, you're of the worst of the Muslims, right? You're of the most efficient of them. So I even feel bad sitting in front of people giving advice, but whenever you reflect on that, like, if you really think deeply about that, if you're the the worst of the Muslims, and everyone else is more, striving and honest and, striving to revive the Sunnah, and you're that deficient, what will that leave you with? It sort of almost gives you a drive that you're not going to, if you're the worst of the Muslims, then you've got a lot to work on, right? You've got to use, your every moment from now on to really strive in this religion. And striving in that religion means that, you're using your every moment, your every breath, to seek the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That, I have all of these deficiencies and I'm really striving my best, and I'm doing the best I can, but I'm going to firstly strive by seeking knowledge. And that's something that is not, how do we say, very trendy in the community these days, right? Like if you're seeking knowledge, maybe it's at a conference, or maybe it's, once a year kind of event, or, it's not something that has become popular anymore, right? That, like, actually knowing your religion. And a lot of people, if you were to ask them, very basic questions about the religion, the amount of knowledge has actually severely decreased, right? Like, our teachers, when they come from the East, they'll be like, you're asking for knowledge that, when they're asked to teach certain subjects, they'll say that they're being asked to teach topics that children are normally very well versed in by the time they're 10 years old in the West, right? So this change, it needs to start with us. It needs to start with us having that keenness for knowledge, right? It's not just about, well, I want my child to learn this, this, and this. We need to firstly look at, what do we know, right? What are we doing about our own knowledge? And this is something that Seekers Hub in general, that this is what we're working on, that we're working to revive that love of studying, that love of, seeking that, seeking after your deficiencies, seeking to almost rectify what's gone wrong in the past, and to know, the way forward, to seek and learn about your religion the way it's meant to be, so that you can pass it on to the next generation, right? That you have something to give your children. So this knowledge, and which is obviously accompanied by action, because it's not about, memorizing things rote and being able to tell other people about it. Like, for example, some people, they'll feel a great deal of pride in having their kids like memorize a lot of Quran, but there's no concern on acting on that, or the khuluq of that child, how that child's character is evolving. It's more about, what can I show to other people, which is a kind of backward approach to what needs to be happening here. That as a family, as a whole, we all need to be striving to seek knowledge. We should all be in some type of study circle that you attend weekly, and that this example needs to be shown to the children, right? That you have that care and concern for perpetuating knowledge, whatever it takes, whatever, you'll be the person who's studying, you'll be the person who donates, you'll be the person who comes and says, can I clean up after the event because I just want to be a part of this. Like, you have that care and concern that helps people. It helps firstly yourself, in that you get your actions under control, that you're behaving in a way that is beloved to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. You're using your every moment, seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and you don't waste your time, that you're always striving for that goal, like seeking the pleasure of Allah, that you don't know if that will come through helping a friend, or facilitating knowledge, or helping others in need, that's your number one goal. And that, when you have that as your goal, that is something that the children will very much pick up on, because they're always watching you. For the people here who have children, you know that your children are constantly like following you, right? Or watching you, or what are you doing? Or like if you're opening your computer, you know, what are you opening it for? Like they'll start asking you all these questions. And so it's about, you know, now you're being held up as a role model. That's you're the child's first role model. So they pick up very quickly on are you doing everything that you've been teaching me? Like all of these values that you've been teaching, that we're supposed to love Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we love the Messenger sallallahu alaihi wasallam. So where do those priorities fall into place in your everyday kind of living of life as a Muslim in the GTA, right? And so that is something that it's quite a burden, because, you know, and it's a burden, but it's a blessing, because when you do put the time into teaching your children what are their priorities, they're the first ones who will tell you, well, why are you wasting your time with this thing or that thing? Or I think you know, why are you so avid on going to that sale? Like, you know, like you saw something in the flyer. What, like they're the first ones who will come back to you and say, why are you doing this? And so when you start to justify it, it's sort of like you start to realize that, you know what, it's the blessing of that intention that you initially had that sometimes you lose sight of as they get older, that it comes back to you, that the children will remind you. And then, you know, sometimes you'll pick up on it and you'll say, you know what, you're right, and I'm not going to that sale. I'm not going to just waste my time online looking at this and that. I'm going to use my time more usefully. I'm going to make an intention, you know, instead to do something better. So they sort of keep you in check when you have this kind of your right priorities in mind. Another thing I wanted to mention, that as parents, we also have to learn to forgive our own parents. You know, that a lot of times when we're talking about what we should be at Islamically, you know, sometimes it's very easy to say, well, my parents didn't raise me the way I should have been raised, and that's why. Because, you know, our parents did our best, and one of the best pieces of advice I was ever given was that you need to just learn to forgive, that your parents did what they could for you, and you have to just let that go. You know, that what happened, but it doesn't need to repeat itself, right? So if you were raised in a family that didn't have knowledge, you know, you can become that family that has knowledge and is able to spread knowledge, and, you know, maybe raise your children on that path of knowledge, so that they in turn, you know, have that love and desire to rectify themselves and to seek knowledge and to improve themselves. There's also the point about, you know, we have to also re-examine when we're looking at ourselves, that this was mentioned by Habib Ali al-Jifri, that we need to look at you know, how well we exemplify the sunnah, that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, he was the best of examples, and that we as believers are passing down his sunnah, and, you know, how the best way to conduct yourself as a Muslim from generation to generation. And the analogy he used was of a mirror, that you know, if we are really working on ourselves, like, you know, day and night to improve ourselves, that we're continuously polishing that mirror, right, and working on that mirror. But the moment we allow ourselves to slacken, it's almost like that mirror starts to get cloudy, right? And then it's a little harder to see through that mirror, you know, the light that has been given to us, right? And so when we start to neglect ourselves, that mirror starts to become cloudier and cloudier until there's almost no light being reflected in that. So it's really important that we work on our, our quote unquote mirrors, that we work on polishing that mirror and seeking to rectify ourselves on a I initially want to say day-to-day basis, but it's not even day-to-day, it's a moment-to-moment basis where we're really constantly reevaluating our intentions, what we're doing, what we're spending our time on, what do we think about, what are things that are of consequence to us, and working to improve ourselves, to be in a state of remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to improve ourselves. And this is our first and foremost priority, that these are the things that we need to work on firstly as parents, right? Before we start to look at, well, how can we help another person? It's almost like they always use that analogy of, when you get on an aircraft, they always tell you, well, in the event of emergency, you have to be able to put on your own mask first before you can help your child with their mask. Because if you pass out, you're not going to be able to help anyone else. It's very similar to that. If you don't work on yourself, your heart, your own knowledge and what you need to be working on, you're not going to be as efficient as you would be if you were to, really work on these things. And it's something that will affect the children more than anything, because as we all know, like if someone comes to you and starts lecturing you about something you should be doing, it's just not as effective as someone who, is really living that example, and you look up to them as, for those of us who have role models, thinking of your role model, the person you really want to be like, they don't need to say a single word to you. Honestly, you're just always watching them. You're mesmerized by their every movement. You just want to, be that way. So that likewise, that's what you want to be as a parent. Somebody that the child looks up to. They want to be like you. They see like the little things you do, and they're learning from those experiences. So this is the first thing we want to look at, because you're never going to be able to control anyone in this world. Like, we all know that. Like, you cannot control, how your husband behaves, the husband's, you can't control your wife. We all know that. We can't control our children even, right? Like, it's not something, it's not in our hands. But what we can control is our own selves, right? How we're conducting ourselves, how, what kind of record are we going to bring to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on the last day? This is something that we can continuously work on in our moment to moment, and strive to rectify that. And, we make dua that we all die upon the, La ilaha illallah, Rasulullah. So we really strive to doing what's in our control and in improving ourselves. And it's very interesting because in life, there's so many things that happen to you, and you're always wondering, well, why is this happening to me now? And why is that happening to me now? Because there's, in your life, there's so many chances that we have before we meet our end. Like, you're born, you go along this path until you get old, or some of us don't get old, and our time comes. But there's so many times where different triggers or events, they're there to turn you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, right? That, you're faced with sudden difficulties, like that, you're just like, why did that happen? And you can't explain it. It's a lot of times it's just Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is trying to turn your heart to recognize, why are you here, right? And to sort of get your priorities in order. That even sometimes something looks bad, like you lose somebody that was close to you, they pass away, or some sudden event happens. For example, for me, I broke my leg last year. A lot of people know that. But, in the beginning, it looked like something that was very bad for me, right? That, you broke your leg. But, it was also a blessing in it, right? When you turn something that seems like a tragedy in the beginning, that in reality, it's something that's meant to turn you to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So last Ramadan, I spent it in bed, like, because I couldn't walk. So And that was something that really changed me actually as a person, because, I was able to focus a lot better. And here I get very distracted for the people who know me. But it's just something to keep in mind, that with your own personal trials that you face in your life, that these are all moments that you can turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And I bring this up now in this session here because you having children is another one of those moments. It's a moment where it sort of faces you to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because you need to have that, it's like these little people are following you, they're always watching you, and they're really putting you to task, because the things that you are very interested in or doing, they're always watching you, and it's a continuous test of almost your faith, right? Like, because everyone can act a certain way when they go out, or they go to seek knowledge, or they go to, when you're out and about. But when you're at home and, when you're tired, how do you conduct yourself, right? This is when your children are watching you, mind you, right? Like, to relax, I like to waste time online. I like to go and look at this and that. I like to, I don't know, whatever you do. Your children are examining your priority system. So it's just, this is another way that you're being tested, and you'll be brought to account for the kind of example that you set before your children, right? It's one thing to talk about how you should behave, but it's your children that can really testify, like, are you living this example that you're trying to bring before them? So I don't have much time left, but just quickly, other attributes of the murabbi, or the person who are bringing up the children, it's the mother and the father. So there are certain attributes that they both need, and there's certain attributes that they need to have as a team, right? They need to have a certain level of adab that they always have between themselves at home, that they conduct. They treat each other with respect, right? That you have good communication between your spouse. And if you don't, it's something that you should really work on. There's a really good book. It's called The Relationship Cure by John Gottman, which we recommended in the marriage session. But really work on that relationship, because the children also learn from that example, right? Like, how do you conduct yourselves, right? How are decisions made in the home? Like, the children are watching and learning from that as well. You also learn from the joint experiences between, the mother's history and the father's history. They were separately raised in separate households with different parents. So there's two ways of looking at how you conduct yourself with the children, right? What worked for you, what didn't work for you, and comparing experiences and working from that. There's also, and then in particular to the mother, in particular to the mother, the child really learns a sense of judgment and problem resolution, because, a lot of times the children come running to you with a problem, and like Sheikh Faraz was saying, you're not the police officer of the house when we're talking about teaching tahdib. But, you have to give them those tools that they need to learn how to work out problems between themselves, right? So they really learn that from the mother, because usually she's with them most of the time. You want to teach them how to have proper adab amongst themselves. And a very good course to take on that is, we talk a lot about it in the Islamic parenting course. And just before, I don't want to forget, for the Islamic parenting course, if you haven't taken the Islamic parenting course, which we offer online and is free, right now it's in session, so we can't enroll more people. But if you're interested in taking that in the future, you can sign up at the front desk for it, and we'll notify you when the next session is starting, which is after Ramadan, and you can take that, because we go into a lot more detail in that course, because there's only so much we can do in this short time span. But also for the mother, I wanted to just bring up that she also sets the atmosphere of the home, right? That how, like, by her having that wisdom of how she runs her house, that she keeps it all in order, and having the food cooked, and like the house in order. It's not easy, right? And raising these kids who keep running up to you and saying, well, mommy, what about this? Mommy, what about that? It's not easy, right? So through her patience and continuous striving, right? That continuous concern for knowledge, and putting this all into play and into practice, that this is something that really affects the I made those slides. That makes that affects the household atmosphere, right? So, and it's also one of encouragement, that it's like Sheikh Faraz was talking about, that parenting isn't about just lecturing the children whenever you see them doing something wrong, but that you're encouraging them. And teaching them adab in the earliest forms, especially with young children, because they say this is when you start to teach them how to behave with their parents and with the other children in general. So I'm going to end there because our time's up, but we still have a lot more sessions and there's a lot more to talk about. I ask everyone to, if you have any questions about parenting in particular, again, like Sister Sadia mentioned, to write them down. You can put them in the front box, and we'll address as many as we can in today's schedule, inshallah. And Jazakallah khairan for coming, inshallah. So I'll leave it.